And so when I think of a cult, I think of a destructive cult, a group that is hurting people, that is causing damage. And that varies by degree from group to group. But what they all share in common, besides their harmful behavior, is that they have a charismatic leader that becomes an absolute authoritarian dictator. And that leader, whatever he or she says is right, whatever they say is wrong, and you cannot disagree with the leader. And the leader becomes an object of worship. You can see that in the reverence for L. Ron Hubbard, in the kind of reverence that Jim Jones demanded and received from his followers in the People's Temple, and of course Marshall Applewhite, who claimed to be an alien from outer space. In a former life, he was Jesus. So the leader becomes an object of worship and is the defining element and driving force of the group. And the leader has no accountability, no meaningful accountability, is a dictator. And then second, that when you look at the indoctrination process of the group, you can see that its purpose, and it certainly won't be admitted by the group, but its purpose is to shut down your critical thinking, to stop you from being able to reflect, to think independently, and to instead engender dependency upon the group, the leader, to think for you. And ultimately, to relinquish your autonomy and just become totally enmeshed in the group. And then you can identify techniques of coercive persuasion, thought reform, influence techniques that are being used to shut down your ability to think. And when you run into a group that has that kind of leader, that kind of indoctrination process, and that does harm to people, that is a destructive cult. Now, there are some that are just after your money. And then there are some that are after your money, free labor, sexual favors, and it escalates. And there are groups that are on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe they're a 1 or a 2. And then there are groups like NXIVM, Jim Jones, that are a 9 or a 10. And then there are groups that start out as maybe a 1 or a 2. And then over the years, the leader becomes more and more demanding, and it escalates to where they become a 5, a 6, an 8, and they go on. So that is what I think is important, is not to use the word cult loosely, and to understand that it has a very distinctive meaning, and that a destructive cult has 3 core characteristics that I write is the nucleus for a definition of a destructive cult. And I based that on a paper written by Robert J. Lifton in the 80s, a psychiatrist who taught at Harvard Medical School. And he wrote a paper, Cult Formation. And he identified these 3 consistent characteristics that all of these destructive cults have in common.
Interesting. Are there any cults that aren't destructive today?
Yeah. There can be groups that have a charismatic leader, that the leader basically indoctrinates people to have a mindset. One group that I think is a good example is Arcosante. This was a architectural kind of philosophy called arcology that was originated by Paolo Soleri, an Italian architect who relocated in Arizona. And he created a kind of experimental city called Arcosante north of Phoenix. And they made the Paolo Soleri or Arcosante bells, which are famous throughout the world. They make these beautiful bronze bells and clay bells that people buy. And Paolo Soleri was certainly an object of worship and reverence in his community, but he didn't hurt people. In fact, arguably, he helped people. And there was permission or a legitimate reason to leave. and people would stay in the community and then move on. They'd have alumni gatherings. It was, if you could see Arcosanti as a cult, it would be a benign cult. And I think that it is possible to have a benign leader. But unfortunately, when leaders garner a great deal of power, again, it seems to corrupt them. And though they may have started with good intentions, some of them, though I don't think most of them do, they become corrupted by their power, or they become more and more delusional as a result of being worshipped and having no criticism from anyone in this kind of bubble world that they create.
Have you ever been contacted by anyone or retained by anyone to help talk somebody out of a political ideology?
Only what I would call a political cult. For example, the LaRouches. This is the group behind Lyndon LaRouche, who was the perennial presidential candidate. And he created a kind of cult following. And the LaRouches, as they were known, were considered a destructive cult by many people. And I would sit with and talk with people that were involved with LaRouche over the years. And also there was a political cult that was led by a man by the name of Nino Parente. And it was a communist, supposedly, organization. But again, what you look at is not what the group says it believes, but how it behaves. How is it structured? What is the nature of the leadership? How do they indoctrinate people? What is the net result of that indoctrination? Are they hurting people? Are they helping people? What is going on? So you're looking at the structure of the group, the dynamics of the group, and if you will, the politics, if it's a political cult, and there have been a number of political cults over the years, that's simply a facade. That's the outer shell. And what you find with all these groups, whether it's religion, pseudoscience, politics, or multi-level marketing, whatever, that is the veneer. And what's behind that is the mechanisms that I've talked about, the thought reform that can be identified by behavior, by the dynamics of the group. And so really, when I sit down with someone, very quickly, I get away from what is the outer veneer of the group and drill down into, well, how does this group really function? How does it behave? How does it affect you? How is it affecting your life? How is it affecting your family? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is the leader actually accountable to anyone? How do you know that? How do you know where the money goes? Is there financial transparency? So you're looking at the basic building blocks of the group, not its mask, the facade that it presents to the world. Because all groups will have some kind of facade, some kind of veneer, in order to basically trick people into becoming involved. And people who are politically active will join a political cult, or people that are very idealistic will join a supposed charity that is really a cult. So you have to get beyond that outer layer or veneer and get into how the group really functions.
Find out who benefits from this. So, is there one person behind this that's reaping all the benefits of all the people, and sort of the structure of, is there like a business structure behind it, or what are the mechanisms involved to make this work and make this one person or small group of people benefit from it, right?